Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome on this sunny autumnal afternoon in London. We're delighted this afternoon to welcome His Excellency Dr. Ahmat Jidoud, Minister of Finance for the Republic of Niger, for this round table. And the Honourable Minister will address us today on the theme of climate finance and rural livelihoods in the Sahel. A bit of housekeeping to start with. Today's meeting will be conducted in both French and in English with simultaneous interpretation, and it's fully on the record. In fact, the Honourable Minister has very kindly indicated that he will be speaking in English, so that's very much appreciated. But the translation is there for those who wish to use the French. I'll just say a few words about His Excellency. The Honourable Minister is in London today on his way back from the IMF World Bank meetings in Washington, and I think you may all know his CV. He was appointed Minister of Finance in 2021, and before that was Minister Delegate in charge of the budget. And prior to that, he worked for a period at the IMF's Africa Department. His academic training included development and applied macroeconomics, and his experience in public debt management and financial sector development and growth and migration issues are only some of the areas in which he is specialized. He's done research on the ground, I understand, which will no doubt enrich what he'll be talking to us about today. Now, Your Excellency, you've agreed to talk to us on the theme of climate finance and rural livelihoods in the Sahel for about 20 minutes, after which we will have good time for Q&A until our close at 5 o'clock. Your country is very vulnerable to climate change. It is a difficult reality that you live with day by day, and your country is also vulnerable to insecurity in some areas. And your country has a lot of young people. I understand that your population growth rate is about 4%. So the theme is very pertinent indeed for the whole of the Sahel region, not least coming only 2.5 weeks before COP27. So, Your Excellency, delighted to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bob, for having me. I'm taking the risk to speak in English, so I express my apologies in advance in case my English is not what you expect in terms of pronunciation and understanding of the issues. I would like to first say that I'm really honored and delighted, and actually it's a big privilege for me to be invited here to speak on these issues with this respectful audience. I would like to express my sincere thanks to the Chatham House for the opportunity to share my thoughts and experience on the challenges our countries of Sahel are facing. Some of the challenges that Bob has already started to frame. I will then also go into some directions on how we can, as decision makers, including government, private sector, civil society, international financial institutions, how we could team up together to address some of these issues. I understand that maybe for some of you, Sahel is just on the map. You cannot understand where it is. So let me start by saying that Sahel is broadly located into the West African countries, starting from Senegal, including Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, and Sudan. And it's populated by around 3 million people, which is the figures from the United Nations in 2020. But this population was like 20 million in the 60s. So which is like from 21 to 100 is like 5 times today. As for Niger, it is a very large landlocked country located within the center of Sahel, and 3/4 of the country is located actually in the Sahel, in the Sahara Desert, and 8% of the population is living on agriculture and livestock. And livestock, if you look at the widespread, the global situation in the Sahel, livestock farming provides a livelihood to more than 21 million of the people in the Sahel, which is like almost 20% of the population. Of course, as you can see, the themes that we are talking about today, green finance and the livelihoods in the Sahel, is relevant given the situation of these countries. And of course, as you might expect, these countries face tremendous and daunting challenges stemming from diverse sources. The first challenge is population growth. The Sahel appears indeed to display one of the fastest growing population in the world, with an annual growth ranging from 2% to 4% over the region. And following these dynamics, the age structure of the population will, for years, be predominantly dominated by young people under 20 of age. And if you look at the figures for Niger, for example, for the next 36 years, Niger will have the highest youth dependency, which is like the ratio of people younger than 20 over the number of people aged 20 to 64. Over the next 36 years, Niger will be one of the highest in this number. Of course, if you look at the broad issue in the Sahel, the demographic dividends that one would expect from this workforce may be large, but unfortunately, it appears to be decades away for the majority of the countries in the Sahel. The second issue, which is a global issue actually, is climate change. For people in the Sahel, and particularly those living in Niger, climate change is not an opinion. It is a reality, a dramatic reality they live and they are struggling every day with. Climate shocks are driving millions to the fringe of survival, and they are contributing to the recurrence of food crisis, recurrent epidemics, cyclical floods, droughts, and forced displacement. Farmers experience scarcity and loss of productivity and fertile lands. Livestock herders see their capital, which is their herd, being wiped out over the years. For example, if you look at one of the latest drought we had in 2010, it is estimated that this drought has killed more than 4.8 million of heads of cattle in Niger, which is like 20% of the herd, and like $700 million that it's costed to the economy. And recently, in 2021, because of the low rainfall, which actually barely lasted only 1 to 2 months over the country, and in normal times it's like 4 to 5 months, we have lost more than 40% of the production of agricultural goods, which is like putting 4.4 million of people under food insecurity and malnutrition. And to protect the vulnerables, the government has to spend more than 500 million CFA franc, which is like $850 million to protect the vulnerables through subsidized food, but also through cash transfers, which are intended to more poor people and those who are living under malnutrition. On the macro side, if we look at the numbers as well, we were expecting the growth rate in 2021 to be 5.4%. But unfortunately, given this loss of production in the primary sector, in the agriculture sector, growth was only 1.3%, which is, of course, showing that, I mean, if you look at the growth rate of the population, which is 4%, it's a negative growth rate of per capita GDP in the country. The first challenge is security crisis. Niger, since 2021, Niger and also the Sahel country, Sahel region, broadly speaking, is severely impacted by terrorist attacks, which started actually following the collapse of the state in Libya, but also the rise of Boko Haram in the northeastern side of Nigeria and Black Chad. Of course, insecurity causes forced population displacement, disrupts agricultural production, as farmers can only go to their farms maybe partly or never. But also it affects the mobility of pastoralists and livestock. Pastoralists, these are the herders who are migrating all over the regions to feed their animals and also to feed themselves. Furthermore, security shocks are amplified by both demographic dynamics, but also climate change. With population growing at 4%, for example, in Niger, or around 3% in the Sahel region, climate change reduces the productivity of it puts pressure, of course, on the scarce lands because lands are limited in terms of the number, and also it reduces their productivity. On the other hand, climate change reduces, like I said, productivity, but also it destroys the capital of those who are living, for example, under their cattle. And of course, this is creating a conducive environment for the expansion of terrorism as people's livelihood become limited and constrained, increases the likelihood of ethnic and inter-community conflicts resulting from disputes over land possession or use. As like I said, as population grows, the number of lands, the area of lands is limited, but also on the other side, you have pressure from those who are living under agriculture. The fourth challenge is infrastructure gap and limited access to financing. In spite of having a wide range of investment opportunities stemming from, for example, huge reserves of underground water, natural resources, for example, in Niger we have uranium, oil, gas, coal, phosphate. The lack of access to sufficient and affordable financing makes it difficult for our countries to turn these opportunities into real economic wealth and jobs. For example, in Niger, speaking about opportunities, recent geological and hydrogeological studies carried out by the United States have shown that we have like 2.5 billion meter cube per year, which are renewable water, 2.5 billion, and 2,000 billion of non-renewable water reserves, which is actually one of the biggest of the African countries. And we have significant, like I said, uranium reserves, gas, oil, etc., but they are yet to be exploited at their potential. Of course, this is because, like I said, because of the constraint to access financing, because as finance resources are limited, building infrastructure in relevant areas like health, education, roads, energy become a bottleneck for access to basic public goods for the growing population. The fifth challenge of them is shallow financial systems. Of course, we cannot speak about green finance without talking about the depth and the quality of the financial system. Sahel economies are characterized by a dominant informal sector, but also shallow financial systems, with a banking rate ranging from 7% to 40%. In Niger, it's like around 8%, and in the West African countries with the region which we call WIMO, it's around 40 to 60%, but on average it's 40%. Household and small businesses run by youth and female find it, of course, very difficult to cope with exogenous shocks, reducing their resilience and affecting their livelihoods. Of course, if you are experiencing shocks and you have no possibility to get, any way to get for example, a loan, as we have seen even in rich economies during the COVID and other shocks, it's difficult then to strengthen your resilience and to be able to face the shocks, the impact of the shocks. Of course, these are some of the challenges. I may go through many of them, but I think these are the most important ones, specifically security, population growth, and mostly climate change. Challenges have always solutions, but as the COVID pandemic has taught us, national solutions to global problems do not work. Insecurity, climate change are global issues, and they deserve global solutions. And for the Sahel countries, action at the global level is needed. And this has to be done swiftly, because the more weight, the costly it will become for all of us, the more money we'll need, and then the less action we'll do. So we need action swiftly, efficiently, because the money we will have, or whatever we'll be doing, we need to do it efficiently, but also boldly. We have to go really with bold actions, reforms, and bold financing, of course. So following this, I would like to suggest some of the areas where we can help or where we can work together to addressing some of these challenges. The first area, of course, is accelerating demographic transition. We can do this through significant investment in health and female labor participation, because improvement of female education is paramount in this process, given its long-term impact on demographics, but also in reducing gender gaps. In Niger, under the President Bazoum's leadership, girls' education is a key pillar of our development strategy, where over the last years we have been implementing a package of initiatives to provide incentives for girls to be enrolled in schools and to stay longer in school, because our strategy is that the more we keep young girls at school, the earlier or the later they will have, they'll be able to have kids. They will take their time before they get married, so they will have less kids, but also they will participate more on the job market. So this is going to impact, of course, the population dynamics, but also it's going to improve human capital and the health of the kids. We are allocating, for example, more than 20% of our budget every year for the education sector. And now we are also implementing a very specific program which is intended to build hundreds of boarding schools for girls throughout the country. We had recently a roundtable in New York where donors have pledged to finance most of the program budget, which is more than 100 of boarding schools so far we have gotten from some of these donors. The second area where we can work together and where we need action fast and, of course, with everybody is mobilizing sufficient resources to help these countries finance the abysmal needs in infrastructure. Like I said, there is an infrastructure gap. And this is to unlock the potential of job creation, both from the public and private sectors, and to absorb the growing flow of young and men and women on the labor market. And for that, my thought on this is that our Sahel region needs something like a Marshall Plan. This will help in developing, like I said, the infrastructure of the region, but also in expanding the provision of public services in key areas like health, education, energy, and roads. Large-scale private sector engagement and investment will be needed to drive the transition to low carbon and climate resilient economies. Development finance can play a critical role in catalyzing, leveraging, and guiding this investment. The third area where we can work together, and mostly here, is coordination among donors, coordination among international financial institutions. It is indeed encouraging to notice that the commitment and development of diverse initiatives by these international financial institutions like the IMF, which has put in place what they call a Resilience and Stability Trust Fund. And these kind of instruments are tailored to the needs of our countries and their specific countries. We see also some initiatives at the UK here with the task force which is intended to work on these issues. We welcome these kind of initiatives, but we need more coordination among donors to putting in place different innovative financial instruments to ensure more complementarity and to account for country-specific needs. While international financial institutions, like, for example, like the World Bank, which could bring a lot of financing, it's also important that to provide guarantees to de-risk private investment, because it's one thing in mobilizing resources for the public sector, but it's also important to leverage and catalyze more financing from commercial and private financing. And the fourth area is climate justice. Africa is only responsible of less than 3% of global gas emission. Yet, our countries suffer the burden of the devastating consequences of climate change. On the behalf, of climate justice, rich countries, including UK, have to meet the pledges of $100 million during the COP26 for developing countries to help them cope with climate change. There have also been pledges, specific pledges, which need to be met and fulfilled, specifically on the adaptation fund for $350 million a year, and the least developing countries fund $600 million to help vulnerable people boost their resilience to the worsening impact of climate change. Like I said, these pledges have to be met, and the UK, who is now assuming the presidency of the COP, may use its full leverage on the other rich countries to ensure access to these funds for the Sahel countries. The fifth area where we can still work together is financing research and development in agriculture for Sahel countries. Although we have seen that studies have revealed that agricultural research and development has one of the highest returns, The sector appears to be underfinanced. And while climate change remains a challenge, we should look at it as an opportunity for innovation in specific sectors, driving jobs and growth in developing countries. Indeed, innovation is critical in addressing the structural challenges to malnutrition, food security, productivity, loss of lands, droughts, floods, and animal disease posed by climate change. Transfer of knowledge still here is cooperation and coordination. Through strong cooperation between countries is key in ascertaining the positive externalities of research and development. The six of the areas where we can still do something which is specific to Sahel countries, the resilience of pastoralism families, which need to express their needs, providing them with essential services and infrastructure, and giving them the tools and knowledge that they need to manage their lands on a sustainable basis. The last area, of course, we can get the money we need. We can have the most beautiful programs we need, but without improving governance, none of this could work. So the seventh area is improving governance, which is necessary to foster strong and efficient institutions that promote the values of efficiency and fairness. Niger has made significant progress in the process over the last years after the first democratic transfer of power between two democratically elected presidents. In addition, bold structural reforms have been recently implemented to improve the legal framework to fight corruption, but also to create a conducive environment for private investment and business. I will go on areas, but I think that I have gone through some of the issues and areas where we can have some solutions. I would like to stop here by expressing my full gratitude for the opportunity, but also I'm looking forward to answering some of your questions and comments, and to tell you that despite these challenges, our region has a bright future. But this future depends on us, and we have to fight together. We will not bend the knee to the challenges. We will have to fight them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Quite a meaty presentation there, and I thought it was very useful that you were able to set out at some length some of the possible solutions to your challenges. As you said at the beginning, how one teams up to address these issues with the help of partners. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll move now to questions and answers. Can I remind everyone this is on the record? Anyone's welcome to tweet this event using hashtag #CHAfrica. Please, when you're asking questions, and we might take them in threes, just say who you are and where you work. That would be very kind. So let's pass to questions. Would like to take one? I have one from the beginning, if I may, Minister, which was you were mentioning the need for finance, significant finance, 100 billion. You were mentioning capacity building support as well. How easy is it, do you think, to ensure that the climate change finance that you may get actually reaches the vulnerable and the young? Is there too much bureaucracy? You were implying that there was an issue of coordination. Does it take too long? I think these are some of the issues that people are thinking about prior to COP27, but what's your view? We'll take some questions following that.
At the end of my presentation, I said that we also need to improve governance. Of course, in all our countries. And it's not only about Sahel countries, it's all about African countries. but it's all over the world as well. Like I said, also, we can get the money we need. We can get the best project we have. It doesn't solve the problem unless we make it possible. And I think there is such a commitment from our governments, from our countries, when you see the challenges they are facing. Just give you one example. If you look at the area, the Sahel countries today, Niger is standing really strong. This is the dividend of the reforms we have been putting in place all over the years to strengthen governance, to strengthen our capacities in terms of human capacity, but also in order to fight against what you may call, corruption. And these are the things we need to do. We need to continue. They will not be over now, but we have to really keep the momentum. We have to go through it. But of course, those who are giving their money should not wait until we are clean. They have to do it now, because the longer you wait, the costly it will become. And climate change, like I said, is not only for us, it's also it's a global issue. We're actually, taking the burden of it. But the consequences are also more migration, more threats to the security of all of us. And we need to act swiftly. The swifter the better, and we need to do it now. Of course, the other side of the, improving procedures, improving transparency, improving governance are the issues that are on the table, and each country is cognizant of that. But for us in Niger, we were cognizant like years ago. We have started implementing our agenda of reforms. We have already started really, bearing the fruit of these reforms. We have to insist and to do it, to accelerate and to keep the momentum, like I said. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We have a question at the back, the lady there. If you could say who you are, thank you.
Anna, is there one? Okay, great. Anna Joy Ricker from the Tony Blair Institute. Thank you very much for, as you said, very comprehensive speech. I'm really interested and completely agree in this point that Niger has stayed strong in a region that has obviously had a lot of turbulence. Can you tell us more about what you've just talked about, governance and reforms, but what the things that Niger has done specifically to reach the more marginalised communities and the regions outside of Niamey? I know that was a priority for the president too, and I think there's some really interesting best practice for us to understand and learn from. Thank you.
On the right here. Paul.
Paul Melly from Chatham House. I wonder, I know there was a summit at the beginning of, I think, last year to raise more money for the Great Green Wall, La Grande Muraille Verte initiative, and some huge number of billions was pledged. What, in practice, at the national level for Niger, does that actually translate into? And is any of this money yet arriving? And how do you, as a government structure, actually then apply that to particular projects or initiatives? Thank you.
Thank you. Gleda Land from the Environment and Society Programme here at Chatham House. Minister, you mentioned the need for more coordination amongst the donors and financiers. Is there anything specifically you think that they should be doing to coordinate for more effectiveness, especially around climate-related or development finance? And secondly, do you have any examples to give of a successful project that you really think is working well in your country? Thank you.
Thank you. Three set of very good questions, Your Excellency. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I did well to come with my colleague Al-Kash, who is the Minister of Trade. He's going to respond to some of the issues. Very difficult questions, actually. I will take them to Al-Kash. What have we done, well, in order to reach the other people in the countries and to keep our country safe so far? I think we have been alert since the beginning. When we saw that the Libyan state was falling, we understood that we are in threat. And, governance is all about inclusion. In Niger, there's no discrimination, as you can see in many other countries. I'm not naming anyone. But I think in Niger, there's no minority in terms of managing power. We can have minority in terms of the number of people, but there's no minority in terms of who is running the country. As a matter of fact, you see the president is from a minority group. But no one look at it like it's a minority because we don't care. What is important for Niger citizens is to have, strong institutions, strong governors, people who are working to keep the country safe, to feed them, to build roads for them, to build hospitals, to educate their kids. This is what is needed for a country, and we, as a country, are very proud of what we have achieved so far. But we know that the milestone is really far. And it's important. This is what I think is really keeping us strong, is keeping us safe. But of course, there are still threats, There may still be, minor, how do you call them? Brebis galeuses, I don't know how do you call them. Brebis galeuses. But I think inclusion is important. Like I said, no one feels that he is a minority. Like myself, I'm a minority group. But I don't feel like I'm from a minority. Like I said, the sharing of power is not based on any kind of this. And I think this is something that's important. Of course, democracy is important as well. We have built, strong democratic institutions over the years. We had a president who, ran the country for 10 years, two mandates, and he passed the power to another democratically elected president. I think this is something very important to mention. Like you said, in an environment where we have turbulences, we have uncertainty. And this is what we have done in Niger. And we are going to keep this momentum. We are going to strengthen it. And this is important for a country to stay. We need a state, and not a government. And the state is the institutions. La Grande Muraille Verte, yes, I think, to be honest, I don't have any detail on what has been done so far on the Grande Muraille Verte, but I know that there are a lot of projects which are being undertaken by the Ministry of Environment. And correct me if I'm wrong, Al-Kash, President Issou has been designed as the responsible for coordinating the work over on the Grande Muraille Verte, and he's doing it. I think he's having consultancies and meetings with his colleagues and peers in order to come up with a strategy for this, but also for the Sahel, for which the United Nations has designed him to coordinate the work for the Sahel countries and on the issues on development and climate change. I'm not sure I got the last question, but I understood that you wanted to give an example of a successful project, right?
Right, a successful project that was helping Niger or another country in the Sahel to deal with the climate change impacts.
And I think you were also asking a bit about coordination and between your partners. Is there anything special that you want to see improved? I think that was
yes,
that it?
Right. And is there anything where there's incoherence, or is there anything that they could do, the donors and the financiers, to better coordinate?
Yeah, when I said coordination, because I have the impression, from my experience, that donors try to work on the areas where they feel really comfortable. But for me, it's more important for them to work on the areas to have the biggest complementarity possible. You can work on a project to have a common project so that we can have a big impact. We don't need donors to work all over the areas so that at the end of the day, you put a lot of resources, but the impact is really tiny. And by coordinating, by putting their strengths and their resources together, the impact could be huge. We said in economics the multiplier, coefficient, right? The fait multiplicateur. And the more they coordinate, the bigger it will be. But if you are working like covering all the areas, that will be a problem. And for me, our priorities we are not trying to cover everything. We are trying to cover the most important areas for us. Like I said, education, infrastructure, but also security. These are for us the most important areas now. We need more resources, but we need partners to coordinate on these issues and network also. Even if you're working in the same sector, you don't have to work alone. And one successful project where we have more donors working on it is what we have like today is Kandaji Dam, a dam which is being constructed where we have like almost all the donors, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, the French Development Agency. Almost all development multilateral donors are working on it. And this is for us a game changer because not only the dam will provide clean energy, hydrogeological energy, it will also provide more cultivable land. It will improve our capacity to produce more rice, for example, which will help in order to reduce, the food insecurity, but also to reduce our, the quantity of imports we have on rice and other agricultural goods. Let me stay here, and with your permission, I would like to ask Alkash to give me more hints on some of the areas I've covered, and he might get more answers, more precise answers than I have. Alkash.
Thank you, Minister. My English isn't any good, so I'm going to speak in French. Go ahead. Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you at Chatham House, which after all is well known worldwide. I think that the Minister really has said it all as far as these questions. I don't think I've got much to add apart from what Ahmat Jidoud has said. But as far as marginalization, which was mentioned, I would just like to add something. You know that when we talk about African questions, one of the questions that's immediately asked is, well, there are states within which there's multi-ethnicity, multi-communities, And sometimes the situation gives rise to conflictual issues. And often they are upheld because of marginalization. However, I believe in Niger, as he said, we've been able to manage that situation. At the beginning of the 90s, there was a rebellion, the Tuareg rebellion, and it lasted a while. But at the same time, Niger was able to really go into its resources, was able to find a definitive solution to that particular issue. First of all, because Niger succeeded in having an agreement with the rebellion, or the movement of rebellion, and especially as far as those that were marginalized, they became integrated. And so that meant that we were able to establish a certain stability within Niger that Mali, for example, never encountered. And I'm sorry for quoting other countries, but they weren't able to solve the issue in the same way. So therefore, the Tuareg were integrated, or at least those that felt marginalized, were integrated into all aspects of the state. So the President Soufou, the first thing he did when he came to power in 2011, he appointed a Tuareg prime minister. And then also all the ex-rebels, he integrated them in the mechanisms of the state. And some of them found themselves to become ministers, or some of them were working within decentralized structures within the state itself. But above and beyond all of that, there's also a mix which is associated with the history of Niger, which means that this country was able to develop a certain inclusion of its community, and it means that today it is able to appoint as the President of the Republic someone who belongs to the smallest minority within the country. And that doesn't give rise to any kind of problem. And you see, it's something that really is quite extraordinary, basically, deep down, that was done. And that gives a really good example. But at the same time, we are faced with, along our borders of Mali and Burkina, there is a terrorist movement, and that movement sometimes tries to associate itself with the local community problems. And those situations are sometimes maintained by a kind of marginalization which exists in a certain kind of population that has a kind of a sedentary activities. You'll see that most of the jihadist movements are associated with communities, in fact, that are working farming. And the reason is because, in fact, that activity was not really properly dealt with. They, in fact, sometimes encourage instability. I'm often thinking about one thing. For example, in the States, when there were cowboys, that was a period of conflict, violence, permanent, stealing herds. And that's what we find as well in these milieux. In fact, then in order to be able to find a definitive solution, we're going to have to rethink the activity, this pastoral activity, this breeding activity, and possibly modernize it and try to fix it so that it no longer gives rise to violence, because the way in which it's carried out at the moment, it does give rise to violence. And so therefore, potentially, that's where we can really do something, because of course it's also linked to climate change. Why? Because this kind of occupation, those who work in agriculture, they often go from one country to another, and so therefore that gives rise to conflict as far as the population on the ground and the share of natural resources. So that's just what I wanted to add, but I believe that it's a situation that we're actually dealing with pretty well in Niger. Thank you.
Intervention, very interesting. Catherine, did you say you'd like to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you, Bob. This is Catherine Inglehorn, the UK ambassador in Niger. I just wanted to add a couple of points. One about COP27. to really underline that as the UK hands over the presidency of the COP to Egypt in November, one of our priorities for Egypt that we've been very much encouraging the Egyptians to take forward is the question around access to finance, to climate financing. As the Minister highlighted, at COP26, it was really made very clear to us as the presidency that whilst we put a huge amount of emphasis on the generating pledges to attain that 100 billion a year in climate financing, actually accessing for the countries, for the customers, if you like, for the people that the money is actually intended for, accessing that money is incredibly difficult, and especially for a country such as Niger. So COP27 is being billed as the Africa COP, and as such, access to finance really has to be a key part of that. And certainly the UK has been working on various initiatives to try to work with countries to enable access to finance, and indeed inviting Niger and other Francophone countries to London for the Francophone Investment Forum. One of our intentions is to enable them to talk also to the UK's own development financing institutions, who will be focused on infrastructure that can contribute to tackling climate change. Secondly, I wanted to comment that we've been very impressed that at the commitment from President Bazoum of Niger, and to really underlining the importance of the link between climate and security, particularly in the Sahel, and but around the world elsewhere as well. And he's given us a lot of profile at the end of Niger's presidency of the UN Security Council last year, but he's consistently spoken about climate and security wherever he's had the opportunity to raise it. And as both the ministers have flagged up today, that link is very clear in the Sahel, where we see the impact of climate change depriving young people of opportunity and of hope and future, which ultimately also drives them towards terrorism. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid that we have a time constraint. We did start 5 minutes late, so I'm going to give the meeting another 3 minutes, Minister. And I'm really most grateful for you and your colleague, distinguished colleague, for giving so much information. There was one gentleman over there who wanted to ask a quick question. It's got to be 30 seconds, and the Minister will answer in 30 seconds.
Merci beaucoup, Michael Fulkerson, de l'Haut Commissariat du Canada.
Thank you very much.
Quick question. You were talking about the abundant resources of Niger, oil and gas. You know, there's a tension right now in the international financial institutions, the development finance institutes, the donor countries, about donating to fossil fuel infrastructure projects. So I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about where you would stand, what you would say to these institutions who are struggling with this issue. Thank you.
I spoke about fairness. I spoke about climate justice. I told that to Bob when we were discussing informally a few minutes ago. I told him that it's really unfair that we're asked to do transition to low carbon energies, but we don't have the needed financing. It's expensive to invest in these sectors. But at the same time, we have abundant natural resources like coal. But we have a shortage in energy. How do you do? What do we do? We're partners willing to finance it, but international financial institutions are putting some constraint. I'm speaking about the IMF, the World Bank. So there's something that needs to be done on this. I think this transition has to be really deeply thought in the sense to either we get a lot of money for us to go straight to the transition, to go through the transition, either we get enough financing for us to develop, to exploit our resources, and then to think about transition. Let's because, like I said, now it's an existential issue where we have people, a flow of people coming on the labor market. We need to provide them with jobs. We need to provide them with resources, education, health. But if you don't have money for it, you're just creating, flows for terrorism groups to recruit them. So it's really something we have to look at. I understand that you have in mind that it's unfair. This is why you ask the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you very much for answering all the questions with such clarity and openness. We very much appreciate it. You set out your hopes for the future, the challenges and solutions, and looking to a bright future. You talked a bit about many of the important issues that are important to your government, like governance, inclusion, integration, democracy. And it was a very, very useful session. I think just towards the end, we were getting into even more meat, actually, more interesting discussions, which are very relevant to what is going to be discussed on the floor in just over 2.5 weeks at COP27. And we're most grateful, anyway, for a very, very interesting hour. You set out various challenges to your partners, including those of this country. And thank you very much indeed once again for your excellent intervention and that of your colleague. And we appreciate very much your comments. Thank you.